Hello friends, editing Michaela here, just jumping in on the front end of this video to just give you a little bit of note of context for today's video. This is a interview that I did for Reiki Crossroads and Connections about a year ago, over a year ago, with my dad when I was visiting him in Pennsylvania. I've previously done a couple other interviews with him. He's a super interesting guy who's done a lot of interesting stuff in his life. So we did a previous interview talking about his work with astrology and music, bringing those together. I'll link that video down below. In this video, we talked about his work with the I Ching as a guide and divination practice that he has used for most of his adult life. And that video was intended to be shown to all of you fine people a year ago when we first took it. But there was a phone kerfuffle, and the where the video got recorded originally didn't transfer over to the new device. I didn't realize that. I thought it was lost forever, and then like a shining treasure, I found it in the old phone, and I was so delighted because I now get to share it with all of you. So if you're wondering why my hair is suddenly a lot shorter than it is right now, that's why. This is an old video. But I'm really excited to be able to bring it to you because, firstly, I think there's a lot of wisdom coming from my pop, Jonathan Petty, about the use of divination and just his perspective on how that works within energy practices. And also because I want to encourage all of you to spend some time with the elders in your life and interview them. Ask them about whatever interests you or interests them, or even the mundanities of their life, whether that is a parent or mentors or a aunt and uncle or teacher, whoever is in your life who's a couple of generations ahead of you. I have found it to be such a delightful experience having these conversations with my dad. I've learned things about him in both of these conversations, or all of them, that I never knew before. So I recommend it. All right, without further ado, let's get into that conversation from last year. Enjoy. Hello, friends. Welcome back to Reiki Crossroads and Connections, an ongoing exploration of the practices and systems that can help you to live a life that is rooted, that is spacious, that is connected, and that help us all to remember ourselves. And we're doing this through conversations between a Reiki teacher and practitioners of a wide range of modalities in the arts, in the sciences, in the environment, in all manner of magic and good, juicy things. And in doing so, we get to really trace the pathways of healing that humans have created since the beginning of our existence. My name is Michaela. Thank you so much for joining me for this little piece of the journey. And this is a special episode to me. At any rate, if you've been with me for a little while, you might remember this gentleman here from last year when I was once again in the fine state of Pennsylvania and got to do this interview in person. And I'm really excited to welcome Jonathan Petty back to the show. Jonathan is an author, he is a musician, an ethnomusicologist, and he's my dad. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's very good to be here.
Yes, in your own home.
In my own home. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Right, right. We get to sit down and, we have these wide-ranging conversations when I come to visit each year to this absolutely gorgeous part of the country, this beautiful home. And, we sit and we have coffee and we talk about all of the things. And last year it occurred to us, we could maybe memorialize some of these conversations, the ones that really speak to that intersection between the work that I do here with Reiki and the work that my pop has been doing most of his life, that I've really only more recently become much more aware of and in conversation about. So it's really special for me to get to have this conversation and to invite all of you, dear friends and listeners, on the YouTubes to join us. So last year when we had this conversation, you had just published a book and we got to dive into that book, which is The Astrological Music of Richard Wagner, which was such a juicy conversation about synchronicity, about astrology, about the ways in which certain forms and patterns arise in nature and in the human consciousness over and over again, and how we can participate in those systems, in those patterns in conscious ways. It was a really wonderful conversation. If you have not checked it out, friends, I will put that link down below. It is well worth your time. in that conversation, we touched just very briefly on another system of practice that is very much connected to our conversation about synchronicity, but we didn't get to dive into it specifically in that conversation. So we get to do that today. And to set a little bit of context for, kind of how I'm entering into this conversation, as I said, we've always had this amazing, like, robust, ongoing conversations about life. But conversations about spirituality specifically are more recent for our conversations, which has been delightful. And I had to really kind of realize something last year when we kind of formalized that conversation in these videos, which is that I had always had a really strong misunderstanding about what your spiritual perspective is. And I knew that you identified as an atheist, and I think I had a really narrow understanding of what that meant. And I made some big assumptions about what it meant to have that spiritual orientation, namely that to be atheistic was to be aspiritual. And I guess I assumed that you kind of didn't have a spirituality. And that really couldn't be further from the truth. And it's like when I really reflected on it, I'm like, well, but you raised me with a spiritual perspective, but it was more like kind of the water I was swimming in. It wasn't something I was really conscious of. So it's really juicy to get to look at that more specifically and to unpack that. And so when we kind of started in on that last year, one of the things that you shared with me and demonstrated and that we dug into a little bit was your work with the I Ching. And so that is what we are going to be talking about today, is not only what the I Ching is as a system of practice, but the threads that you followed in your life to arrive at that system of practice, and then what it has meant to you to work with the I Ching over many, many, many years. So I think I'd love to start by inviting you to just share with us, first of all, in a rough sketch, what is the I Ching? And then what were the threads that you followed in your life to come to be a pretty extensive practitioner?
All right. Well, maybe I should start with the threads in my life
Sure.
and then go to the I Ching and what it is. I began the spiritual practices that I, have practiced with astrology. And I began that in high school. I had a girlfriend who was a zealous astrologer, and she kept, we would have conversations, and I would, we'd have discussions, and I would state a point of view. And then she would say something to the effect of, well, you're saying that because you're a Cancer, which I am, July 7th, 1949. And that would enrage me. No, I'm not saying it's because I'm a Cancer, but I'm saying it because it's true. So anyway, we had several of these conversations, and I decided that I would get to know astrology, better than I did, which was nothing. So I bought a book called Astrology Made Easy. I still have that book.
It was kind of like the astrology for dummies of that generation.
It was the astrology for dummies of that generation. That's right. And so I read through it with a yellow marker and marked all of the sun signs, with passages that I thought referred to me, that were adequately described the kind of person that I am. And my intention to doing that was to show that they're all randomly distributed, So I did that. And then I looked at it, and the stuff that I yellow marked under Cancer was, five times more than I had, marked with any of the other sun signs, So I was impressed by that, Maybe I was too easily impressed in those days. I was, in high school after all. And so I started reading astrology books. I read her astrology books, and then I learned how to cast horoscopes, and tried it out on my friends, and the usual way that you start out with something, you try it on with your friends. And I got pretty good at it, actually. But I decided that I wanted to formally, learn more about it in a formal setting. So I enrolled in the in the Faculty of Astrological Studies, which was in London. So I took a correspondence course. I was down in Los Angeles at the time. And so I basically studied that for 2 years and got a certificate in it. And then went off to practice astrology, you know, merrily on my way. I got my big break came from a synchronistic occurrence that happened. I was walking down the street one day, and in a windstorm, and you know, very strong wind, and the wind blew up against my leg a piece of paper, and so I was at the time kind of trying just trying to decide how I would progress, you know. So I reached down and absentmindedly took the thing, you know, and pulled it off of my leg, and then it went back on my leg, you know.
It's like, no, I chose
yeah,
you.
I mean, I thought it was a piece of you know, I don't know, junk of some sort. So anyway, I picked it up and looked at it, and it was a flyer for a series of lectures, spiritual lectures called Man Ranch Seminars, which was held up in a working sheep ranch in Ukiah, California. And it said, Joseph Campbell, you know, the heroic journey. And I had this buzzing kind of feeling, you know, that this was going to be important, you know. So I thought, okay, I just read The Hero of a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell.
Yes.
And, you know, I had noted that how much of that book, you know, contained astrological symbolism without referring to it. So I thought, oh my gosh, you know, look, there it is. It's Joseph Campbell, the man himself. So I enrolled in it and went up there, and it was this very large old building, like a 19th century farm building, very extensive, and you know, where they were actually, you know, raising sheep. And so the daughter of the owner was this spiritual person, and she started these seminars, you know. So anyway, there it was. It was Joseph Campbell, and we sat around for 3 days listening to and discussing archetypes and you know, the hero and you know, the various mythologies of the world and how they were all interconnected and so forth. And that was a very important experience, but it wasn't the important experience that was, you know, that was the synchronistic one. The synchronistic one was that we had lunch, and there was a woman there by the name of Mary Reedy. And Mary Reedy was a psychiatric social worker. And so we were having lunch in, you know, the break between lectures. And she said, well, you know, how do you do? I'm Mary Reedy, you know, and, you know, who are you and why are you here, you know? And I said, well, my name is Jonathan Petty. And she goes, Petty? Wow, tell me more, you know, I mean, more than Petty, you know? And so I told her that I was an astrologer and so forth. And she said, no, this is the most amazing thing, because on the way up here, I have been deluged with the word petty. And, you know, I drove up here and there was a car in front of me with a license plate, petty. I had looked in a magazine, and the first word that I saw was petty, you know, and she listed several more of these. Wow. Petty. She says, I think that there must be something important about that. And so, and you're an astrologer, so why don't, how would it be if you were to do astrological reading for one of my clients?
Wow, she jumped right to clients,
She jumped right to clients, yeah, you know. And you know, this was for her, you know, for her information, not for the clients. Yeah. So I said, well, certainly, of course. And so I did that, you know. She gave me the birth data, and she wanted me to tell her what my impression was about the issues that were. So I told her, you know, what I thought the issues of this person would be, and she exclaimed that it was dead on, you know. And so, and how, you know, what kind of advice would I give? So I gave some advice, and then she got back on the phone to me and said, that was very helpful. I found it very helpful. How would you like to become my consultant?
Ooh.
And I said, certainly. So anyway, I became the astrological consultant to a psychiatric social worker. And, all because of this piece of paper that blew up against my leg and refused to stop blowing up against my leg.
Right.
So and there was two aspects to this synchronistic event, and I'll explain synchronicity in a moment. But one was that this paper behaved as if it was alive, and thereby focused my attention on it.
Yes.
And it made me look at it instead of just kicking it off and going about my business. So and second of all, when I was doing that, there was this feeling of importance, feeling of meaningfulness, strange meaningfulness.
Yes.
Not meaningfulness like, it's meaningful that I should have a hamburger instead of a hot dog, but that real meaningfulness. And then it evolved in the event into a conclusion which changed the course of my life.
Wow.
Changed the course of my life. In her case, it was my name. She wasn't aware of a meaningful coincidence until I said the name Petty.
Right.
And then all of a sudden she got this big, the strange importance feeling, and it turned out to be important. And we worked together for about 5 years.
Wow.
Did hundreds of readings, and that experience, brought me into the psychological, into the world of psychiatry and psychology, and I felt that I should study this more, So I studied in psychological materials, and particularly the works of Carl Jung. So anyway, that is how I basically got into the astrology aspect of it. As far as the I Ching is concerned, after about 5 years of doing this with Mary Reedy, and also having my own private practice, I felt that I was getting into a dead end. That I was not learning. I was not expanding my heart. I wasn't. I was repeating myself, and there was a feeling of a lack of spiritual connection to what I was doing, and so I considered dropping out of the astrological business for a while, to get my head straight. There was also a situation of, since I graduated from doing readings for Mary for her clients to actually doing readings for her clients too. But I found that I wasn't trained in psychiatry or psychology, and therefore I had not been through analysis myself.
Yes.
And so, since I had not been through analysis, and I had not developed the protection, the border that one must maintain, and the objectivity that one must maintain if one is going to delve deeply into the psyche of another person.
Yes.
And so it was, I was very gradually over time becoming more disoriented, and clearly, I look back on it now and realize that it was, I was undefended. I was undefended against it. So, but I didn't want to give up spirituality, or spiritual practice. So I had been aware of the I Ching for most of my astrological career, but had not picked it up. I had been aware of it from another spiritual friend that had said, "You really need to study this." And so several years went by, and it ripened in the unconscious. And I found this book. I bought this book, which is Richard Wilhelm's translation of the I Ching. And I read through it, and also I read some Jungian literature on the I Ching, especially Carl Jung's works, essays on the I Ching, and began to practice it in the same way that I began to practice astrology. I tried it on myself, tried it on my friends, And now, for those of you who don't know what the I Ching is, this is a book that was compiled in China in BC, China like 200 BC.
Wow.
It's a very ancient book, and it's one of the first books that we know about from classical China, or from archaic China. It's a book of divination. It's considered to be a book of divination. I have my own definition of that, and I'll get to that in a moment. But it's composed of moments, little essays, very short essays that are that one conjures up by chance, by doing chance behaviors. For example, casting or casting yarrow stalks. That's the way they did it. Or the way I do it now, and most people do it, is throwing coins, throwing Chinese coins. And the the coins then, if they're heads or tails, or one or the other, they are have a certain numerical value. You add up the numerical value, and that value identifies what's known as a hexagram. A hexagram is a structure of 6 lines, 6 parallel lines that are either solid or they're broken. And the solid lines are called yang, and the broken lines are called yin. And the I Ching is based on the philosophy of yin-yang 5-element theory, which is the most ancient cosmological theory in China. Anyway, these hexagrams have texts attached to them, and these texts are in a rather poetic form. And you read the texts, and the theory, the Chinese theory, is that these texts refer to the moment in time that you threw the coins. So that's the basic structure of how it works.
Yeah. So I first of all, I love entering into this conversation through these threads of your story, and I want to just like kind of take a pause from the narrative and just really appreciate getting to hear stories I've never heard you tell before. I've never heard you tell that story before.
Oh, wonderful.
And so this, for you, dear watcher, is your invitation and encouragement to do interviews with the people that you care about in your life, because you'll hear stories that you've never heard before that are meaningful. You don't have to put on YouTube or do anything in particular with that, but just take some time and ask some questions about things that are meaningful. It's been really, really powerful to do that. And, and then to see, certain threads that are present in both the stories that you just told here and the ones that you told last year in our conversation. Certainly synchronicity being a strong one. And I look forward to you refreshing our memory as to what synchronicity means to you. And then, of course, astrology. And then this sensation that you describe, this way of knowing that something has spiritual meaning, right? That okay, there's this sense that something is important.
Strange importance.
Strange importance, right?
Yeah.
And, that's something that, is kind of a side tangent conversation that we don't necessarily need to touch on here, but just to, introduce this idea that all of us have, a system, a body, a mind, an energy field that, creates things like our intuition and our relationship with the world around us. And it has a certain language that we can learn to understand. And you clearly can read that language, right? There's a certain sensation, a certain sense of perceiving what's happening in a given moment that indicates to you there's something here that needs to be paid attention to. Yeah. There's something here that's meaningful. There's something to focus on. Like, don't let this moment pass by without really taking note of what's happening right now. And so I just wanted to kind of flag that, because it's an important capacity that we all have, and one that certainly the system of Reiki helps us to build. And so just one I wanted to note there. So with that, let's step back into this practice with the I Ching that we now know as an ancient system of divination from China, and that it consists of a certain structure that is simple and yet quite deep. This casting of coins or of other objects that give you a yin yang or one or the other value that then adds up to a hexagram that then is linked to certain poetic narratives that have been divined by somebody in the past.
Yeah.
So yeah, pick us up from there.
Okay, well, it might be best to describe briefly what is the difference between astrology and the I Ching.
Yeah.
That is, as practices, what is it that you get out of, let's say, an astrological reading? You know, what is the benefit of an astrological reading versus the benefit of an I Ching reading?
Yeah.
Now, my view of astrology, I'm what's called a Jungian astrologer, and the most common way of understanding astrology is that planets and signs have energy, and that they act upon one and in effect change something in oneself into something else. For example, changing you into a Leo personality like yourself. Now, I went along with that for years and was very unhappy with that interpretation. And but what I finally have come up with is that there's not an energy happening there. What is happening is that as a person grows older and has more experience living in our society, that person becomes sensitive to some or others of archetypal images that are located, that exist on the plane of the unconscious. That they're psychic images that are part of our minds. They're part of our minds, but they are they exist in the part of our minds which we are not consciously aware of. We have a kind of a protruding consciousness that sticks up, or it becomes the surface, as it were, of another and much vaster psychic reality that is basically all encompassing. There is a psychic aspect to material life. There's a material world, the material world.
Can you describe what an archetype is?
Yes, an archetype comes from Carl Jung's work, and it is an image, basically an image that exists in the mind, in the unconscious mind, and it is a power image, basically. It's an image that basically imagines, pictures, gives form to a drive or an instinct that in us. That we have instincts, and that instinct to stay alive, to survive. Instinct to mate, instinct to eat. We have instinct to commune with other human beings, and these instincts are prior to consciousness. That is, for example, a newborn baby has these instincts, but doesn't particularly have the images present in their consciousness. Their consciousness is very primitive, but their instincts are very developed. A baby, an infant, is a highly developed creature, but its behaviors are very specific and multifaceted. I mean, they're very complex. Yeah. And so the archetype occurs as one grows, and it becomes an image in the back of one's mind. And I'll use you as an example. You're a Leo. Correct. That is to say, you're born with
very much.
Right. And, earlier in your life, you weren't particularly Leo-like, but as you grew up, you your mind became attuned to certain images and not others. For example, the sun. Leo is said to be known by the ruled by the sun, and so you changed your name to Daystar.
I did.
Yeah. Okay. So this is something that is a powerful image for you. The sun. You had a part of your life where you were making solar cookers.
Yep.
And right now, a solar cooker, making a solar cooker is not necessarily a fantastic archetypal experience unless one is drenched in those archetypes.
Right.
Leo rules the heartscapes. I mean, you're thoroughly saturated in Leo imagery. Now, those images are archetypes. They are powerful images in your unconscious that drew you to them for meaning. That is, your style of deriving meaning from life was to identify with certain powerful images like the sun or the heart, and structure your life around these images. They become like the nuclei of meaning in your life. And your style of learning is to apply all these things to yourself, and Leo refers to the self, to the sense of the self or the ego, either one, the ego or the self. And so you've basically devoted your life to projecting yourself onto the spiritual world, and so anyway, so that is what an archetype is.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So back to what you were saying about what is the mechanism for astrology to be predictive of those sorts of affinities for imagery and for behavior and so on. So what is it then, if it's, you said it didn't resonate with you, that it's that the planets have energies that are working on us. So why would it be that being born in late July as a Leo would cause me to gravitate to that set of archetypes? What is your feeling about what that mechanism is?
The causal mechanism.
Yeah.
And another way of putting it is for that to be true. I mean, it's a tall order for that to be true.
Right.
What else has to be true?
Yes, great question.
What else has to be true for that to be, and if that something else proves false, then maybe it's all a figment of our imaginations.
Which is also a possibility.
Which is a possibility. Absolutely it is. The word collective unconscious was Jung's name for the social mind. The social mind. And the social mind, for example, the psychic characteristics that makes us in our own culture able to bond with each other without thinking about it. We bond with each other, we feel unified with each other, we feel a community. We feel that we're a part of a larger organism, basically. If you get right down to it, it's, to be a part of a collective, group is to feel drawn to those people, and to feel that they're, in some sense, one of you, one of you. The collective unconscious is collective because it consists of a lot of things that we don't know about, but it also certainly consists of archetypes. And those archetypes are social. They're cultural. They evolve. They're not individual.
Yeah.
They evolve like to put it one way, our society, the American, the European society is the way that it is from historical, social, cultural reasons. It evolved, and it evolved to be held together by a certain family of archetypes, that rather than some other family of archetypes. Now, the family, the archetypes that are collective to our society and I mean Christian European society, include the astrological archetypes. And those archetypes are what orient us, for example, to the seasons, and give us feelings for the different seasons.
Yeah.
Your being in late July orients you toward the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm.
You have a certain summery personality, and you experience the progressing seasons from a certain perspective in time.
Yeah.
Okay, so the causal mechanism of astrology is the existence and the evolution of these archetypes in the society in which we live. Mm-hmm. Now, it is not the case that every society has the same structure of archetypes.
Yep.
The I Ching, for example, I mentioned the yin-yang 5-element theory, or philosophy. That is the cosmology of the Far East, of the China-centered Far East, China, Japan, Korea, and to a certain degree, Southeast Asia. Now that, just as it takes the place, or it has the relationship to its society as astrology has to ours.
Yes.
So that one does not use, for example, the number 12. It uses the number 5. And in what's known as a quincunx, 5, not like the 5 fingers of the hand, but a center 1 surrounded by a cross of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 around the center, and then the yin yang surrounding that, and that is a cosmological structure, just like our astrological cosmological structure. Yes. That gives coherence to Far Eastern society. So you can say that the collective unconscious both pre-exists, because according to Jung and what I believe is that the world has a psychic dimension, and I mean literally a dimension, just like the 4 dimensions of space and time. Physicists have been playing for about 50 years now with the idea of multiple dimensions as being necessary to explain our, the reality that we live in. And so at least one of those dimensions is spiritual and psychological, psychic. So that's now the difference, again, getting back to the difference between a reading, an astrological reading, and the I Ching reading, is that the astrological reading seeks to, for the practitioner, to acquaint the client with the archetypes which he or she believes to be very important in the client's mind, unconscious. Now, there are people that are not well connected to the archetypes of their own unconscious. There are people who are very well connected to those archetypes. But it's a healthy thing to be aware of the images that are important to you, and that explains a lot of your behavior and a lot of the challenges that you have, a lot of the, because these images are not all consonant. Yes. Some of them are dissonant with respect to each other. Yeah. And so you can go quite a ways into human relations by studying the horoscopes. So there is not a necessarily an energetic like influence of the planets coming down and beaming us. The I Ching reading, an I Ching reading, is a reading of the meaning of a question. Now, what is necessary to do an I Ching reading is that a person comes to you with a question. The I Ching reading is very practical. Yes. What an I Ching reading can and can't do is important to know. It can't tell you, spiritual information about your life. You can't do that. It's not designed to do that. What it can do is tell you information about the question that you have. And if you have an important question and go for an I Ching reading, that reading will visualize the significance of that question now. What is my relationship with my wife now? I mean, it's not your relationship, throughout your whole life or
Right.
how it develops, but it's a very concrete, kind of reading. You had told me that you haven't heard a lot of this, these stories, but I'd like to go back to the question of how I transitioned from astrology. I didn't give up astrology, but how I added the I Ching to it.
Yes.
And for that, I have this right here. This is a little bottle, and this little bottle, if you note, has a hole in it.
Sure does.
It has a hole, and
Looks like a little fairy house.
yeah, and it has pieces here that were were knocked out of the hole. So there it is, at the hole. Now I have kept this bottle in my curio cabinet for 50 years, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is this: I was doing an I Ching reading, one of my first I Ching readings, with a person, and I did it in my own home. Did these readings in my own home, and we were sitting across from the mantelpiece, the fireplace's mantelpiece, and this bottle was on the mantelpiece without the hole. Mm-hmm. It was solid, and I was I don't even remember the exact question that had been asked, but the answer, I was getting a lot of response from the client. He was he was really into the answer, and we were developing the answer together. And at one point I said, and this feeling that we have of rightness shows the power, and it went like that, the power. And I was facing the mantelpiece, and as I said power, there was a strange feeling of strange importance, and the bottle cracked and danced like this on the mantelpiece, and then righted itself with the hole, with the glass knocked out of it, it had flown out of it. And when I had said power, I made that gesture with my hand, and I felt this, like feeling of going to sneeze. Mm-hmm. That's the most, the closest I could come to the, what the feeling was like. It was like, that.
So your intuition speaks to you in sneezes.
Yeah. So my intuition speaks in sneezes, and so and we both went whoa, like that. Now the question is, what does it take for that to happen? In my entire life, so I'm 75 years old, and I have never had a bottle break apart when I've waved my hand. Other than this, it's the one time, and it happened instantly as I said the word power and passed my hand across the axis of it. So the odds, I would say that the odds of meaninglessness are very low. Very low. I've never heard of anyone else that's said, "Oh, by the way, did you know that my glasses break? In my kitchen just spontaneously break." No, nobody has ever said that to me. And I suppose if we were to send out questionnaires to 6,000 people, we'd probably get 6,000 zeros. So something happened there, and it was connected to the moment of time. It was connected to an I Ching reading. Mm-hmm. And it gave me, this was one of my first I Ching readings, and the experience of having this phenomenon take place was to get me very focused on the I Ching, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would identify that occurrence as an example of synchronicity.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't simply that, you know, that I passed my hand and you know, felt a sneeze and, you know, the thing exploded. But I have heard of that happening before. For example, Carl Jung, in his Memories, Dreams, Reflections, his autobiography, describes when he was growing up in his home, a fight that he was having with his mother, and he had this experience. He said it was, you know, this strange experience, and the kitchen table split down the middle.
Wow.
Now that's, you know, that's the difference between Jung and me. You know, he gets a table split down the middle, and I get a little piece of cheap glass. So, but they're in the same family of phenomenon. What it takes for things like that to happen is what's called synchronicity.
Yes, you promised us a definition.
And here it comes, right? When we say that the I Ching visualizes or makes manifest a moment of time, what we mean is that the meaning of that time is meaningful. It's alive. It's part of this collective unconscious, this psychic dimension of life, and it has control over a lot of our lives. You know, the nature of time moments have changed our life, or changing our lives all the time. I mean, every moment is you know, has a meaning, and it's meaningful in a larger than a personal sense. Yeah, it's larger than, it's in a larger than personal sense. It's in a cosmological sense, really. The mechanism, the I Ching, is a way of ritualizing. You know, you go through a lot of brouhaha to get the answer, you know, to get the image of the moment. You have a ritual activity that you do, and that includes you know, casting coins. You know, it's better to have the client cast the coins, because what the practitioner, the I Ching practitioner, actually does is nothing much as far as power is concerned. No power at all. All right. Let's look at a hexagram, an I Ching hexagram.
Yeah, that would be really helpful to get a sense of what gets communicated in these interpretations of a moment in time.
What you get when you throw the coins, you know, what you build up is a structure called a hexagram, and it's called hexa 6 because it consists of 6 lines. And the lines are either yin or yang, that is female or male. And the way that the hexagram behaves depends on whether or not you have power lines. You know, for example, 3, you know, like let's say tails, you know, is 2 points, and heads are 3 points. So if you get 3 heads, you get 9. You know, so that's power. You know, and then that'll let the hexagram evolve into another hexagram, which shows you a little more about how the question evolves. But let's just take a random sample. This is the hexagram number 11, and it's called Tai in Chinese, which means peace. And the hexagram is composed of 2 trigrams. All hexagrams are composed of 2 trigrams. And these are given poetic names like Kun, the receptive, earth. You know, these names all come from nature, by the way. Everything comes from nature. It's a very, very hands-on kind of spirituality. In this case, the upper trigram is Kun, and the lower trigram is called Chen, the creative, heaven. So this is a powerful hexagram. And what you'll get is a set of lines called the judgment. And the judgment says, peace. The small departs, the great approaches, good fortune, success. So if you were to have been, if that had been the answer to a question, one of your questions, then that judgment, the small departs, the great approaches, good fortune, success, would have applied to your question. Okay, the image. And then in this book, Richard Wilhelm, who spent his life studying the I Ching, wrote commentaries on the hexagrams. And he says, for example, this is Wilhelm writing, this hexagram denotes a time in nature when heaven seems to be on earth. Heaven is placing itself beneath the earth, and so their powers unite in deep harmony. Then peace and blessing descend upon all living things. And then he goes on. Then there's another set of lines to say the image. Heaven and earth unite, the image of peace. Thus the ruler divides and completes the course of heaven and earth. He furthers and regulates the gifts of heaven and earth, and so aids the people. Now this talks about the ruler. Okay, so what does that mean? You know, like what does the ruler have to do with your question? To me, the ruler is always the spiritual center of the questioner. And so this indicates how your higher nature, you know, your spiritual nature is behaving at the moment. Now then I said that several of the six lines have individual meanings too, that add to the meaning of the answer. For example, the lines 9 at the beginning means when ribbon grass is pulled up, the end comes with it, each according to his kind. Undertakings bring good fortune. Now, you know that you can see that these answers can be very obscure, seem very obscure.
I love it.
And so you have to have done this a lot, you know, the way I practice this is that I assume that all of these images are archetypal. And so, you know, they refer to parts of the psyche of the questioner, of the unconscious of the questioner, and they're rendered in poetic form. Or 9 in the second place means bearing with the uncultured in gentleness, fording the river with resolution, not neglecting what is distant, not regarding one's companions. Thus one may manage to walk in the middle. See, so it's no snap to interpret these lines. It takes a good deal of practice.
I would imagine that practice and that ability to interpret in a useful way, what I'm imagining, and I'm curious how this feels, whether or not this feels true to you, that there's a certain alchemy between having a base understanding of the cultural context in which this was developed. As you said before, different people groups, different regions of the world are going to create their own archetypal, their own, you know, representational, metaphoric meaning for how to understand the world and our place in it and our relationship to it, and that matters. That what, you know, pulling grass up by the roots means in China might have a different, you know, meaningfulness than it might have in Italy, for example.
Yes.
And so having some sense of understanding of the cultural context from which the system came feels essential. At the same time, if we're talking about collective conscious and we're talking about imagery that is somewhat universal in the world and perceptible by anyone, that there also perhaps is a more universal or maybe particularly subjective way of understanding. So I guess maybe the question is, could a person pick this practice up with no understanding of the context from which it came and derive meaningful interpretation?
It can do that, indeed. In fact, I would encourage anybody that's interested in the I Ching to just get a copy of it. I would recommend with Wilhelm's copy edition, but there's many editions, and just throw coins. Just throw coins. Ask, but you're going to get random answers unless you're serious about it.
Yes.
Okay.
How do you define being serious about? How does one approach it with seriousness?
Ask a question that has meaning for you.
Yeah. What's a good question in this system? I guess what I mean by that
would be should I, what does it mean? What does this business venture that I'm being called to undertake mean to me now?
Right.
That would be like if you get no game in the field, then you're pretty sure that there's some negative, unsuccessful, or if you not all of these are successful.
Right.
I
would imagine that keeping in mind that what this gives you is a snapshot of the moment, and it's really pertaining to right now in this moment, what is meaningful about the question, that should be considered when crafting the question. Like it maybe wouldn't be as useful a question to say, where should I be living in 5 years?
Yeah.
But more like, in this moment, what's important for me to know about home or something like that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Now the good news in all this is that I don't think that the cultural context of the original book really means much. I mean, it's good to know it, and you should, if you want to get good at it, you should know it, or you should.
And there's an integrity piece there to being in relationship with the origins of a system.
To put energy into a spiritual endeavor is to get a lot of power out of it,
Yeah.
You can even break glass with it, So, for example, a lot of scholars, Chinese literature scholars, have criticized Wilhelm's in translations of the I Ching as being, seriously flawed. But I don't believe that matters at all. What matters is that the book is here in your hand. What you're dealing with is something which is a systematic grid of images, and that's all it is, and it doesn't matter if it. I mean, a person could have made this book up. If there'd never been an I Ching, somebody could have made the book up and done, riddles, or put the proverbs from the Bible in it,
and it would be valuable.
Yeah, it would be valuable, right?
I think that's a really powerful point, because like I have a number of friends and colleagues who have created oracles, for example. Like they've created their own oracle deck of cards, or a system of images that are cast, such as coins. In my work with soul collage, which draws very directly from Jung, basically you're instructed to be drawn to any image that calls your attention for any reason, and then seek your own meaning based on the questions that you have. And so there's, this, if we're looking again at this concept of the collective unconscious, and that's made up of these icons, these images that attract our attention, and that then our minds have the capacity to make meaning of, then, really, like any way of collecting imagery through poetry, through physical images, through random magazines in a stack, through, just observing the world around you, is going to open up a space if you approach it with seriousness, as you said. And, I would add to that seriousness includes, an openness to the possibility that you can find meaningful, meaningful guidance in the world, in your relationship with it, without somebody else having to tell you what it is. That if that's the case, then, our minds are incredibly adept at finding meaning wherever we look, right?
Yeah.
And so, what we have is this, as you said, it could be a completely random collection of images. And at the same time, we have this deep root of practice and of reliance and trust in a particular system. And that also brings us a sense of meaning, and a sense of at least for me, I'll speak for myself, it brings me a sense of trust and settledness and being able to, kind of trust building a relationship with a system that has existed and has guided people for so long. I have a dear friend and colleague who works with the tarot, and she works with it in a similar way where she knows the tarot very, very deeply, and at the same time really guides people to make their own meaning, in addition to or even beyond the prescribed meaning that each card might have within the system.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's this relationship with these systems of divination, these systems of practice that grows more powerful and more rich when we are allowed or we allow ourselves to bring ourselves to them, rather than seeing them as something external to us that's static, that's going to prescribe meaning to us. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Another example of that would be dream interpretation.
Yes.
For example, in my case, now my dreams in the early part of my life were random. I mean, they were just random dreams, random stuff, junk from the day, or made up of helter-skelter kinds of stuff.
Yes.
But then I started keeping a dream diary, a dream journal, and they very quickly started becoming archetypal.
Right.
They started becoming, and the reason is that I put seriousness into it and paid attention to them.
Yes.
And for example, in psychotherapy, the dream of patients' dreams, are analyzed and discussed, constantly. And, I have absolute conviction that in Jung's practice, his patients' dreams became archetypal very quickly. And because they were being paid attention to, and they were being paid attention to in a ritual way.
Yes.
It's they were allowed to become archetypal.
Yeah.
They were allowed to become meaningful.
Yeah.
There's a permission structure to I Ching readings. You permit the person to, you permit the two of you are permitted to explore deeply stuff that seems gibberish.
Right.
It seems frankly, like dreams. I mean, this is very much like dreams.
Very much, yeah.
There's images of all kinds flowing along, and they're not obvious, right? And the reason that they're not obvious is that they don't mean anything until there's a person asking a question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have definitely found that to be true in the times when I've logged dreams, paid attention, and just even writing them down without trying to make any meaning of them at all. They begin to self-organize, and it begins to, it's like it becomes more of a participation. Our subconscious is like, oh, you're paying attention. Great. Let me give you something more specific. The intuition functions that way as well. And then, participating with a system like this allows that to get codified and kind of get rooted in a particular way that can be quite valuable and quite liberating in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were telling me about the just yesterday you were talking about the practice of becoming avatars. It was
family systems therapy.
Family systems therapy.
No, excuse me, family constellations.
Family, right?
Two different practices.
Yeah, I mean, and you were saying how ordinary people, that haven't ever done this before, can take the roles of a person's anxiety or fear or confusion or what have you, and then start to feel it right away and start living that, while the person is there, guiding the, you pay attention to that, and you permit it to speak to you, and by golly, what do you know? I mean, these spiritual practices, there's potentially an infinite number of spiritual practices.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just a question of ingenuity and follow through.
Yeah.
Follow through.
And to what degree it gets communicated beyond the person that is experiencing it, right? Because we only know about the ones that got communicated and shared enough that then it went out into the community. Right. But so many of us have experiences that have, a uniqueness to them, but also have a pattern to them in the ways that we've been talking about. And I think, so much of it begins with observing that we live in a miraculous world,
Mm-hmm.
and that things occur when we pay attention. Where we focus our attention is what our reality is. Mm-hmm. And that's both terrifying and incredibly liberating to think about, right?
Yes,
that
it
like
is.
what we are paying attention to and how we follow the threads of our attention and how we then connect with other people in those threads makes the reality that we experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be, at on the one hand, there's a randomness to it that we can't control. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, we do have a certain amount of control over where we pay our attention and what we focus our attention on, and then how we pull those threads together. And that, to me, is not only incredibly exciting, but it's also very liberating, because so often we feel like we don't have control over what happens to us or where we go, or what decisions we're forced to make, and so on. But we do have control over what we pay attention to. And when we have a system of practice that calls our imagination, and that feels resonant, and that feels juicy and exciting, and that allows our creative mind to be alive, it becomes a container for our own brilliance. And at the same time, it becomes an access point to this miraculous world that we live in. And then if we're in that long enough, we realize that miraculous, synchronous, incredible, awe-inspiring world that we live in is actually quite ordinary. Mm-hmm. That all of that is really simply how the way things work. I just over and over again lately have been having these moments. I had one the other day up in the cemetery that I told you about, where I'm so aware of both the utter incredibleness, miraculousness of the world, and how completely ordinary it is for these moments of synchronicity and magic and meaning to happen. And I think that's for me part of what it means to really live in a magical way, and in a way where I feel very hopefully defiant against a story that tells me that we don't have control over what happens to us. And that the systems of our society and of our government are what determines how our lives are going to be. Certainly they have a great deal of impact on us, but this relationship that we have to the world itself takes primacy over anything that a government or a society is going to create. Yeah. And we have the choice of whether or not to pay attention to that. And that's something that I've been learning, being in relationship with systems like this, and that I can see clearly at work in how you live your life as well.
Yeah, you referred at the beginning of this talk to my atheism, and now that we've got some spirituality under our belts here, then perhaps the atheism makes more sense. Yes. I consider all religions to be exclusion structures. They're, to believe in Jesus Christ, or to believe in Allah, or to believe in, these things excludes you from noticing what's going on around you. It gives you a rigid. They give you a rigid, mechanical kind of attitude toward life. The rituals, for example, lose their living force and become just mechanical, doing actions over and over again. And so, and those exclusion structures include mostly gods, various definitions of gods. And so it's that which I'm atheistic, that is not, I don't believe in gods. I don't believe there are, for example, angels or other spiritual entities flying around, or gods, with a plan for your life, that kind of thing. I don't believe, to me, the most depressing idea in the world would be that there was a god, some big hobgoblin somewhere that had plan for me. Had a plan for me. I'll discover my own plans, even if I'm too dumb to make them, at least I'll discover them,
Well,
So that's that. No, and then all of these spiritual paths that we've been talking about, like your friend that makes the oracles, it's creative. Religion is anti-creative, and but this is creative. Like make your own, make your own pizza. Make your own hamburger. Make your own spiritual system. And then run with it. Make it work. Because allow it to speak to you.
So that, and perhaps that's part of the seed of next year's conversation, because I'm going to go ahead and call this a tradition at this point. We now have a tradition of interviewing my father in the late summer when we come to visit. So perhaps, some of that is a seed for next year's conversation. That as we come to the close of this conversation, I'm curious what you might advise or what you might encourage for somebody who is intrigued by this idea of generating one's own spiritual practice, or engaging in one that they're unfamiliar with. How might you advise that they begin, or what might they be paying attention to?
Well, if they're using the I Ching, then I would advise that they buy a copy of the I Ching. I would recommend Wilhelm's version. That they recognize that it will work to the degree that attention is focused on the result.
Yes.
And that there is a serious mindedness about it. For example, idle curiosity will probably not get you very far. Might, I don't know. It's possible, but and become more and more conscious and attentive to your own responses to what you're getting. What you're after is that feeling of strange importance. That, ooh, wow, yeah, when you get that, you read a line of the I Ching and, oh, wow, yeah, hey, and it's something you can do, but I would advise also that you stick with it.
Yeah.
Do it like you make a decision. I'm going to stick with this for 6 months, or I'm going to stick with this for a year. I'm going to stick with this for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And be intentional about it. Whatever. The most important thing of any of these spiritual paths is intentionality and seriousness.
Yeah.
That you have an intention, and an intention is almost as good as a belief. If you better than a belief, actually, probably. If you believe in in that it's going to work, that's good. But if you intend to do the work, to do the ritual, rituals are basically permission structures that allow you to open up to that allow you to permit the result you want.
Yes.
This is why the Catholic Church is so great with rituals. Millions and millions of people, maybe hundreds of millions of people, really dig their rituals.
Yes.
And if I had to be not an atheist but a religious person, I would probably be a Catholic.
I can see that.
Yeah,
I can definitely see the appeal of that.
With censors,
And I think that, part of the great value of what you just shared is that intentionality and that commitment, to persistence over a period of time can help us to get around the discomfort of number one, not being good at something because we're new at it, of not understanding it, of, being in a state of confusion about it. When we run into, I don't understand, I'm not good at it, I'm confused by it, these are roadblocks to our participation. And if we don't have a mechanism to get around that, to really be able to be uncomfortable in that moment where we don't understand it and yet to continue to engage, then it's of no value to us.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest mistakes I made when I started off in astrology, and it took me a lot longer for me to get good at astrology than it did for the I Ching, because I had experience of astrology behind me, under my belt.
Yeah.
the biggest mistake I made was to worry about if I'm getting good at it.
Right.
I mean, the question, the answer to that is always no. It's irrelevant. I mean, you're not, because the meaning is not coming from you. If it came from you, you wouldn't need the spiritual discipline. You already have it. It's coming from the elements of yourself that are strangers to you, and that you need to find a door. You need to make a door that allows that strange importance to come into your life and say, "Hi, I'm here. Try this out." And you do that by ritualizing it and taking the ritual seriously. And that's the door you're building. The ritual is like a door. And the word ritual may have a dry sound to you, but it's really a living kind of thing. Some kind of behavior, some kind of behavior which is systematic and other directed. That's directed toward the visitor that's coming into your life. The spiritual insight, or the archetype. I mean, these words are so interchangeable. And one of the other things that I mistook was that these moments, these magical moments, are essentially and irretrievably mysterious. I mean, they're simply mysterious. We don't know anything about them other than what we experience. Now, I know what I've experienced. I know about that broken glass. I know that meaning. That the word power, was spoken with the seriousness of a reading that was ongoing, and that broken glass became part of the moment of time that the I Ching, hexagram was presenting to us.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, Pop.
Oh, my pleasure, as always.
Yes, the part of ourselves that is a stranger is a really intriguing place for us to land.
Yeah.
So I look forward to continuing this exploration and this conversation. Hopefully before next year, but maybe more formally next year. So look out for that. Friends, thank you so much for coming along with us in this conversation. I know there's been something here that's for you, something that's intrigued you, that's captured your imagination, something that maybe that you disagree with, that you want to have a conversation about. Please do let us know what that is down below. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your advice in these matters that we have been discussing. And as you go into your day, as you perhaps open up your attention, open your senses to what has meaning for you in the world all around you and within you, may you feel deeply provisioned for that journey. Thank you so much for being with us. Until next time, we love you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.